Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. It's already June 10th. Definitely a different summer. Spring was almost a parenthesis this year. Our main concern today is tourism. From whatever point of view you look at it, in Greece or internationally, this is the number one question. So we already have with us two of the three speakers for tonight. I'm confident we will have a very interesting debate. It's about public health, of course, but at the same time we will discuss how we can save the day for Greek tourism, for many the so-called heavy industry of the country. So what kind of income will professionals, tourism professionals, be able to secure? Professor Bouchalis is with us. Thank you. He is Professor of Tourism and Technology Strategy at Bournemouth University. And we have also Mr. Alexandros Vasilikos, President of the Hellenic Chamber of Hotels. So we'll try to set out the main questions, the main issues. As we always say, here at Dialogues, we like raising questions, but today we exceptionally need answers. Let us try to live with fewer questions tonight. So in a composed way, let us try to discuss tourism that is of concern internationally. We're not the only country having invested in tourism, but even if we were, we need people who will come from abroad. Anyway, so the health issues are of concern, and the tourism industry in Greece must think about what to do. The coronavirus situation has affected everyone. So these are the 30-second dialogues. Twice a month we get together and we discuss not just among panelists, but also with you, our international audience in Greece and abroad, through dialogues.snf.org, through our Facebook account. So welcome once again to all of you following either in Greek or in English. We're looking forward to receiving your questions, comments. We know that we have participants from various places all over Greece. We know that tourism businesses are very, very interested. So you're more than welcome. Please do send questions and comments during our discussion with our panelists. As usual, you will be seeing your questions here on the screen. And of course, we have SNF Dialogues on Instagram, on Facebook, and our mail is snfdialogues@snf.org. I will limit myself to this short introduction because we all know people who own or work for tourism businesses of all sizes. We are all now in the process of planning our holidays, our summer holidays. Of course, this year, this takes more planning, more thinking, a totally different approach to booking a trip, checking accommodation, etc., etc. So my introductory question to the two panelists, Mr. Bouchalis and Mr. Vasilikos, from your different points of view, please tell us, where do we stand? This is June. We are on the 10th of June. In previous years, the tourism season would have started in Greece. It usually starts towards Easter or a bit later, but at this time of the year, we would have a picture of how tourism would develop. But now, on the basis of the measures for the coronavirus, the measures concerning tourists, travelers, etc., what is your take on the current situation? Professor, up to you to start. Well, a few words about the global landscape. Countries are different also concerning the phase of the pandemic. Some are opening up progressively, some others are more cautious. Generally speaking, there's a numbness, let's say. Airplanes do not fly, but flights are resuming gradually. So what we see is this. A systematic effort of governments to relaunch tourism. The main thrust is given by Germany, who will spend 15 billion to save Lufthansa, TUI, and other similar businesses. So this is the global landscape. In the US, of course, the government has taken fewer measures by far. And in China, China was first, of course, on the curve. China is on the recovery phase. So this is my first comment. Mr. Vasilikos, just one comment. Yes, there's lots of hesitation globally. It is the first time in modern history that flights were frozen globally. This is without precedent. No one could have even thought about it, even a few weeks before the ban, not years before. So there's a certain numbness. We cannot foretell the future, as you already said, Ms. Bouzdoku. We don't even know which airlines will be here with us on the day after. Because tourism means flights, first of all, then accommodation, hotels, and all other types of accommodation. So this numbness, if you will, is also felt in Greece. Greek tourism depends on flights, up to 85–88%. This is incoming tourism, which brings us to the countries, the main origins of tourists for Greece. Unfortunately, these were the countries that were more exposed to the virus in the beginning of 2020. We don't have the advantage of road trips like other countries in Europe. Road trips for certain countries are very important. For us, road tourism concerns very specific countries, but car will not make the difference for Greek tourism. The situation, therefore, is difficult. There will be no surprises, I'm afraid, this year. One thing is for sure, that tourism in 2020 will have nothing to do with previous years. What we can do this year, though, is to maintain, to protect the image, the reputation of the country, something that we gained during the first months of 2020. It is our duty to safeguard this positive picture. Hoteliers are working in this direction. They declared ready to engage in this effort in order to restart and relaunch the economy from 2021. Bouzdoku. What you've just described, Mr. Vasilikos, gives us an idea of the complexity of the matter. It is a multifaceted problem. It's not just about whether tourism will be there this year. Which tourists, from which countries, why will they select Greece? And what are the prospects, of course? As I said, it is a multifaceted problem. The problem can be approached from many different sides. And by the way, let me remind you another discussion we had a few days ago. Mr. Bouchalis, you had distinguished various phases after the end of the lockdown and towards the beginning of the tourism season. And you were saying that we must first confirm that we are alive, that the patient has not died. Bouchalis, there are three different domains. The first is the origin of the tourist. Then we have the transit region in between, transportation mainly, and then we have this also includes, by the way, the distribution channel, information, dissemination, facilitation, visas, the border situation, etc. And then we have the destination. For tourism to function, we need three green lights. If one out of the three is not green, then we have a problem. At this point in time, we are still in the emergency situation. Some countries are progressively exiting the emergency, and this is what we are doing here in Greece, cautiously but steadily. The next phase is when the transmission ratio is low, and then, of course, the last phase is when the medication and the vaccine will be available, which will take 12 to 18 months, to the best of our knowledge. So it will take time for sure. So these two schemes, the three green and the health situation, are the two main parameters. Boustoukou, if I may go back to what Mr. Vasilikos said concerning the present phase. Mr. Bouchalis, you distinguished the three phases of tourism and the three phases of the evolution, the development of the disease. And every phase, of course, is linked to the previous and the following phase. So, Mr. Vasilikos, you said something about capitalizing on the good course of Greece concerning the first phase of the health crisis. This is what we experienced. We had some good results in recent months. So, Mr. Vasilikos, it is almost a rhetorical question, but what is your take and the take of businessmen, tourist businesses, about the situation? Because your businesses must now carry a lot of weight. They have huge responsibility, and they have to exercise judgment about whether they can open, when they will open, etc. And how will they manage a case, a patient? Because, as we all know, this is an unprecedented health situation. And at the same time, tourist businesses must operate in a viable, sustainable way. Well, you raised probably too many questions, but there are more than these. These are the main questions, I'm afraid. Businesses wonder, can I open without endangering the health of my employees or my guests? And will I be able to survive as a business?
What you are describing is what you said before, all over the world, and here we see different approaches by different countries. We see different approaches even in the US in different states. So there's an effort being made to try to strike a balance between public health and the economy. It is obvious that there are no scales where you can actually place on the one hand human life and on the other hand the economy. So these are two different things altogether, but these things need to be looked at together. So you described what's happening in Greek hotels, and I know that the average Greek hotel has 42 rooms. So these are small family-run businesses. We can't think of huge hotels in Greece with 500 rooms. So the average Greek hotel has 42 rooms. So this hotelier must take a serious decision. And it's what you said. What you said is a brief summary of what's happening worldwide. The question is, how can I ensure that I, the hotelier, and my staff are safe, meaning that we won't have any health problems? And how can I try to strike a balance with the income that I need to get? Because I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm not just talking about February, but you see that in November to February of 1 year, they decide the slots, the tourism slots for the next year. So you already know in advance what's going to happen in the summer, for example. And now we're in the month of June. We're in the month of June, and the hotelier doesn't know if he's going to open his hotel on the 1st of July, whether they're going to be planes flying, how full these planes will be, and where the tourist will come from, and so on and so forth. So there are more question marks in the hotelier's mind than answers. So it's difficult for him to solve the equation. So bottom line, right now, there are no decisions that are risk-free. As I said, this is a year where we don't expect much. It's just that we have to try to protect the image that Greece has as a tourist destination. And there's only one way to capitalize on this. We mustn't actually lose our good reputation. Let's be realistic. There will be new cases. There have been new cases as we speak. The thing is, how do we manage these new cases? The government has worked very hard. It has thought long and hard. All the tourism enterprises have participated in this dialogue in order for the measures taken in the case of hotels are viable. And of course, we try as hotels, as the Hellenic Chamber of Hotels, to provide the necessary tools to the hoteliers in order for them to be able to follow the instructions of the Single Health Organization, AOP, and the government. We know how to bring tourists. That's not the problem. The thing is that the borders need to open so that people can travel now, given the new situation. And what is this new situation? We're talking about protocols that are in place, but we're also talking about the economy. The crisis, just like in Greece, as in other countries, has led to a financial crisis. And by definition, this financial crisis will impinge on tourism. Tourism is a very delicate, a very sensitive product. It is easily affected by the fluctuations in the economy. So the first question has come. I just want to add one thing, Mr. Bouchalis, and then I'll come to you. Mr. Vasilikos, could you tell us whether you have any idea of how the hoteliers have responded so far? And I'm asking this question, I'm sure everybody wants to open up their hotels, but I also believe that there are people who are worried, and reasonably so, others who can't open their hotels now, or maybe these people don't know whether they have the sufficient knowledge to open up their hotels at this point in time, not just themselves, but also their staff. So what's the situation right now? Can you tell us a little bit more about this? This is not the first time that the Greek hoteliers are called upon to work in a case where there's COVID-19. From end of January and 2 months later, when the hotels were forced to close down. So just imagine on the 25th of January, we sent the first instructions together with EOD to all the hotels of Greece in order for them to know what to watch out for under the COVID situation. And these instructions were updated 3 times until the hotels actually closed down. We're talking about hotels that are open 12 months a year, right? Yes, these were the ones that were open in the month of January, you're right. But there were also some hotels in some destinations, for example, in Santorini, on the island of Santorini, which were open in January. And I speak about Santorini, but there are other just destinations which may be seasonal, but they work in winter. We're talking about winter destinations. That's the high season for them, winter time. So, of course, there is a lot of concern, but as I said, some tools have been given to hoteliers, and these are sufficient so that the hoteliers can gauge the risk when operating their hotels. They can determine the risk, and then they can decide whether they want to assume the risk or not. There are 2 questions, though, 2 discussions. One has to do with public health and protecting one's public health, and the other thing has to do with tourism, with revenue in the tourism sector. Now, public health, everybody has heard a lot about Legionella, and a lot of hoteliers know about this. They've known this for a long time now, and this is why they carry out disinfection, and they are actually controlled when it comes to this disinfection. So we're used to various restrictive measures, and I spoke about the Legionella virus, citing it as an example. And let me now say something else. We opened up a hotel 4 days ago. And of course, there are people working there, and they have many questions and queries. They need clarification. So we actually forward these questions to the experts. There's a long discussion, and we get good answers. We must understand that we don't live in a perfect world. We don't live in an ideal environment. And some things may look that as if there's a delay, for example. But I see that efforts are constant and ongoing. And these are the timetables that we have to work with this year. Mr. Bouchalis, I would like to go back to what you said previously, and let me tell you what my financial advisor tells me. The fact that we did well in the past doesn't mean that we will do well in the future as well. And I think that there's this over-optimism. Some people are extremely optimistic without realizing the risk, because God protected us. Somehow we were protected. I think we have only had 180 COVID-19 related deaths so far. In the UK, there were 60,000 deaths. Of course, the UK is a much bigger country population-wise. But just because we did well in the past, as far as COVID is concerned, doesn't mean that we will continue to fare well in the future. And we see that some people are coming back from the area where they were staying, and they spread the virus without knowing it, because many of them are asymptomatic. They are without symptoms. And we also see that many people do not follow the protocol. They don't act responsibly. And remember what I was talking about. For example, there were parties on the island of Mykonos and elsewhere. And this is why it's very important for me to underscore the fact again and again that just because we did well in the past, it doesn't mean that we will do equally well in the future. I don't want to be pessimistic. Ilias Bosialos from LSE, well, now in his latest comments and announcements, he's more optimistic, and this makes me feel positive. But we need to strictly and faithfully apply all protocols, and people must understand, not just hoteliers, because nobody is going to stay in one hotel alone, in Alexandros' hotel, Alexandros Vasilikos' hotel. So everybody has to stick to the protocol and follow the protocol. So we're talking about collective responsibility, not just individual responsibility. And I think that this is key, at least for this year. So You touched upon a lot of things, and you said that just because we did well in the past when it comes to COVID and we didn't have many cases, this doesn't mean that we should be complacent, that we should rest on our laurels and believe that the situation will be equally good in the future. Now, there's a question that's just come on Facebook. So the question is, did any official body put pressure on the government to look at the opening of the borders more seriously so that we don't have the possibility of a second lockdown? Well, this is a question which has many, if you like, questions inside it. So the question is whether on the table there is a scenario for a second lockdown, and if there is a plan in order to avoid the second lockdown. So maybe there are some plans for small lockdowns per geographical areas or areas which will be separated geographically. For example, some schools that will be closed down. So is there such a plan? And if there is such a plan, who came up with this plan and who participated in the creation of this plan? Was it the academics? Was it some official bodies or associations? Meaning those in the know might have participated in such a plan. So let me talk about doom-mongering and the risk, and then Alexandros can talk about the government. I think that we should actually talk about risk because in the UK, for example, Heathrow and Gatwick may be airports that are closed, but others, like Cardiff, for example, are open. But they're only 1.5 hours away from Heathrow. So somebody can drive 1.5 hours, go to another airport, come to Greece asymptomatic, and you know that some people have been screened and they've been tested negative, and then a couple of days later, they have symptoms. They manifest symptoms, and in the meantime, when they were asymptomatic, they spread the virus. So the question is, what do? We have to be responsible as people working in the tourism sector. We have to protect those working in the tourism sector and their families. We also have to protect our customers, and we need to do the best we can in the current situation in order for us to get ready for the next day, for the future. Alexandros knows a lot more about how the different bodies work, official bodies, that is. So just a small comment on what was mentioned previously. The personal hygiene measures or protocols know no nationality. They are universal. You either follow the protocol or you don't. It's black and white. There's nothing in between. So there was a danger of spreading the virus even before the frontiers, the borders opened. So we mustn't think of different nationalities and people coming to Greece from different countries. No, we're talking about things happening in the economy in general. And there was a question that was asked previously. I don't like making predictions, questions that contain predictions. I'm going to talk about pressure, and I'm not going to talk about predictions or forecasts. We are not the village of Asterix. We're not like that. Of course, decisions to open the borders, well, this is something that is decided by the government, but we also have diplomatic relations in place. We are a member state of the EU. There are bilateral agreements. There are different protocols that are under discussion, and sometimes there is a conclusion at an EU level, or maybe something is abandoned. Just because there's pressure by one or two associations or bodies, then the government will succumb to the pressure and do something. No, that's not the case. So there needs to be a balance. A balance needs to be struck. And I believe that the EU has proven that they are able to keep the balance. And of course, this will also be judged later by historians of the future. But now we are in uncharted waters. Decisions are taken, and there's a lot lot of risk attached to these decisions. There's always a lot of risk. And now, I'd also like to welcome Mrs. Zuni, Georgia Zuni. She is a lecturer of tourism marketing in the Tourism Studies Department of the University of Piraeus. Hello, Mrs. Zuni. I'd like to ask you the following question, Mrs. Zuni. Up until now, Greece did well. It fared well when it came to managing COVID-19. I don't want to repeat what was just mentioned by Mr. Bouchalis, but now when we started easing the restrictive measures and we started talking about how to restart tourism and to have the tourist season and the hotels opening, we saw that Greece made an effort to become more attractive, even more attractive to the rest of Europe and to countries which traditionally have people coming to Greece. For example, Germans come to Greece, the Brits come to Greece, other countries. We know that these are countries, however, that had many COVID-related deaths. However, they are still a target audience. They take up a large part of the pie when it comes to tourism. A lot of people come from these countries. So on the one hand, we saw an effort made by Greece at the same time to communicate that Greece is a safe, quote-unquote, tourism destination under the circumstances. Of course, at the same time, we see this reluctance, and this can be seen from the policies followed in these countries. There is a reluctance that the Germans, the Italians leave and travel to another country. Of course, this is not expressed officially, and at a diplomatic level, this would have gone down a different path. But we see that incentives are provided by these countries in order to promote domestic tourism, tourism in their own countries. So is this yet a factor that makes things more difficult, Is this a case? Is this the case? Can you confirm it? Because I think you're the best to answer. Or Mr. Bouchalis as well.
Look, Bouchalis, at Bournemouth, we have 200 restaurants. They're all closed now for more than 6 months. The UK government, you realize, must take care of employability of workers, employees, business owners, hotels, etc. So they will try to do what the Greek government is trying to do, strengthening domestic tourism in order to keep money in the country to give work to their own people. That's logical. This is what all countries are doing. They're trying to keep monies within the borders of the country. Excuse me, Ms. Suni. I was asked the following question a few days ago. Which country is our number one competitor during this phase? And my answer was precisely this: domestic tourism and road tourism among countries that usually are the origins of tourists to Greece. The French can take a road trip to Switzerland or to Spain, or from Italy to France, from Italy to Spain, etc. This is our competition. The market is not what we call price sensitive. And I'm saying this, and the academics know that very well. The traditional issue, one of the traditional issues was price sensitivity, etc. This year, we are talking danger or risk sensitivity. So concerning your question, Ms. Pozdoukou, we have a global positive picture at this time. Let's keep doing our homework, but apart from that, communication is important, because safety is subjective, and no one can go out and say, I'm safe or I feel safe. So those who have an official capacity must show moderation and must keep saying the effort is ongoing. We'll keep doing our homework in order to protect the country. This is the number one message we should keep sending, irrespective of opening or closing the borders. There will be more cases, that's one thing for sure. And to go back to the previous question, of course there is a possibility of a new lockdown, with or without opening the borders. At the end of the day, it all depends on whether we wash our hands. It's as simple as that. Zuni. The University of Paris and Open Tourism have carried out two pieces of research. The one was carried out 3 weeks after the lockdown, 7 to 12 of April, and then we carried another one from the 22nd to the 27th of May, when the measures were announced. We handed out this same questionnaires, and our conclusion is that Greek tourists are more concerned about the non-compliance. This shows precisely that complacency is a no-go. Personally, I believe that a disproportionate weight has been put on the shoulders of tourism. For example, take a hotel. All costs, all functions have changed, while a tourist will go to the kiosk, to the taverna, will walk in the street, will sit at a bench, etc. However, all responsibilities are now lying with the professionals, with operators. And this is a disproportionate responsibility for our tourism. It sounds like a theoretical position, but it is very true. According to our research, 2 out of 3 tourist businesses and 1 out of 2 tourists are very concerned about the potential effectiveness of measures. Mr. Bouchalis and Mr. Vasilikos earlier said that all procedures have changed. I don't know if the profile has changed of tourists, of the procedure, the booking, the decision-making, the selection criteria of the destination for a business or leisure trip, the timing, when will I travel, and again, what are the selection or the decision-making criteria. All the decision-making chain has changed. And the chain includes the tour operators in the leisure business. We have the operators, the hotel owners, who will provide accommodation to tourists. What about the peak season for our tourism? Will it change? What is the lead time for tourists when they book a hotel or other accommodation? And let's not talk about the day after. So everything has changed. Is that right, Vasilikos? We have 2 different things here. The first is, as Mr. Bouchalis said, is the question as to what the medical situation will be, the health situation will be. For example, if in 1 year from now we can hug and kiss and everything like we did before, because we all tend to forget, right? If we suppose we have a vaccine, etc., etc. Exactly. We have had this discussion with academics, medical doctors, sociologists, etc. Vasiliko. So I was saying that going back to normality is one thing. will we have a scientific solution? And you understand, when someone sneezes in China, then suddenly everyone will be worried. Will we have our Congress as planned or not, etc.? It's a reflex. It's a natural reflex. Now, if the vaccine is invented at some point in time, sooner than later, then things will again be very different. COVID, without any doubt, with or without a vaccine, sooner than later, or the medication, but the virus will expedite trends that were there already in place. And these are things that will change the way people travel. The crisis, the present crisis, will be a catalyst. So some phenomena that would occur in a few years' time will happen sooner than later, and the tourism model will be a different one. European funds are following this trend, and operators are following this trend. So changes will be expedited in the tourism industry. Mr. Buchalis? Well, especially in technology. In just 3 months, we all learned to use all means and devices and mechanisms, and it's the digitization steroids, as we call them. This means, on the other hand, that conversely, other people will not be able to follow. We will also see concentration of capital. Take SARS in Asia. It took 3 to 4 years for people to get rid of masks and go back to normal. Or take September 11th. A friend was telling me that there were about 20 airlines. After 9/11, the US were left with 4 airlines only. So the fragmentation we have in Greece in tourism will give its place to more professionalization. This doesn't mean that the small ones will lose, because we have excellent small businesses in the tourism sector in Greece. But there's no doubt that concentration, capital concentration, will progress. Or if it's not capital concentration, well, the decision-making will be in the hands of fewer people who will be more efficient, more professional, and who will be in a position to know better how they will manage these issues in real time. You see, there are several strategic issues here at stake, and this is the result of the COVID pandemic. All this will be better realized after the reignition, the relaunch of tourism, because tourism is a complex phenomenon. Many people in Greece cannot get to grips with this idea. In the islands and in certain regions, missing one season, one summer, means that these people will be left without work for 18 months. And if you take into account the demise of Thomas Cook, then we're talking about people who will have no income for 20 or 22 months. This is huge. So the decision of opening or not is a very complex decision. And then there are family issues. We have family-owned tavernas, for example. If the mother is a member of a vulnerable group, the taverna will not open. It's as simple as that. That's very interesting. You were presenting to us the optimists, the pessimists, and the realists. If you can tell us more about these 3 categories. I will go back to the questions, but please tell us a few things about these 3 categories. Some people say I'm a pessimist. My mother was hospitalized, and actually I met Alexandros on February 27th when we met with the General Secretary of the World Tourism Organization, who was very pessimistic, by the way, says Ms. Pustuku. Well, not so ominous, actually. He started as an optimist, now he's a realist. No, let me explain that. He had said minus 70%, 70. That's what he had forecast. Is that accurate? Yes. Well, but it depends. In Zakynthos, it could be minus 95%. Rhodes could be 60%. It depends on the individual local markets. And then you can further zoom in. Some hotels may be at minus 50%, some others minus 100%. Buchalis, I mentioned Zakynthos because it's preferred by the British. Corfu is a different island, so origin plays a role. What I had said basically was this. The optimists were following the government. In this category, we had those who used to sell also marketing services. The pessimists were the vulnerable groups, those who had no debt, and those who viewed or considered the situation through a social model, plus the opposition. That was a political comment, of course. And there are realists. I'm one of them. I'm in the control room and I receive information and data from all over the world. So my forecast on February 17th, when we met with Alexandros, was this. I gave him, by the way, the protocols from Hong Kong. Then on March 3rd, I published Brace, Brace, Brace on my blog, and I told people the plane will crash. A few days later, my forecast was that nothing will open until 1st of July, and on the 1st of April, I said that we will not open in a normal way, meaning that we will not have charter flights. Chances are that I will be vindicated. Now, Germany is the big question mark because we're talking about 15 billion. That is why we need to reopen our tourism. This is realism. I've seen many optimists becoming less optimistic, and these are the people who have already started speaking about 2021. Mr. Buchalis, is there any country that follows a model strategy in this respect? Is there a best practice? Well, Asian countries who have faced SARS and, such as Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, who have faced SARS and other pandemics, have been doing well. New Zealand as an island and Australia have fared quite well because they have a clear idea of the pandemic and they made brave political decisions. They decided to protect their population. The economy will suffer, but we will protect our people. Take Sweden or the UK. They did not protect the destination and the people. That was the nonsense called herd immunity. I mean, without a vaccine, this is nonsense. These countries did not achieve the objective. Now Sweden has realized that it was the wrong decision. That's why I looked at Hong Kong immediately. They closed down everything when they had to close it down, and then they started reopening at the right time because they have the right protocols. I remember I gave the protocols to Alexandros and Grigoris. It's 85 pages, and they were amazed. 85 pages. The protocol of the Spanish Rio is 245 pages, I think, with all the degree of detail we need for good protection. Mr. Apologies. I will come back to you. Mr. Bouchalis, do we have this degree of detail in Greece? Does our strategy involve so much detail? And finally, was it a good decision to reopen or not? Bouchalis, it was a difficult economic and political decision. The data, the information, was collected by the hotel chambers and other federations. And then, as far as I'm concerned, I asked all organizations to exchange protocols, because it is not one against the others. We're not in competition, you know. Because suppose you have a big hotel in a village in Kos, you have 5,000 beds. If there is a case in a nearby small hotel because a housemaid did not do something properly, then we all have a problem. In Greece, we are lucky. We have the scientists, the National Health System, Mr. Hardelias, Mr. Tsiodras, and their team have done admirable work. And they have worked very efficiently with various organizations. So we will open. Greece will reopen with caution on the basis of measures. It will not be an unconditional opening. Mr. Vasilikos, and how ready are the local services or agencies, the health services on a local level? Of course, you cannot answer this question in full detail, but are hotel owners safe or protected against the health risks? And who will provide guidance to them? On the basis, of course, of the responsibilities entrusted to hotels.
Talk about Hong Kong first. What really impressed us with what Mr. Bouchalis gave us was the detail, the level of detail, and the fact that it was 85 pages long. These instructions were a document that was 85 pages long, proved that they actually had experienced such crises, such situations in the past. In Europe, there was many precaution. In the past, we had dealt with coronavirus cases more lightly and not as the situation was not as bad as in the Asian countries and Australia, for example, where they were more prepared than we were. And I read in February, and it's wrong to count the pages. We had sent 10 pages to our members saying, careful if you spot these symptoms. And they had gone down to the level of the sanitizers, the disinfectant should have this composition, 45% this, 60%, 50% that. So they had everything down pat. They knew all the details. And this is what surprised us. And I think it's perfectly normal that they were more prepared than we were. Their preparedness level was much better than ours. And I think this is quite logical. And there are other questions also that are very interesting. Sorry, I didn't hear you. Here's the next question. It's addressed to you. So the question is, do you know, Alexandros, if the hotels that will open up will have some coverage. I'm talking about insurance and about legal coverage in case someone falls ill. And of course, if the hotelier has followed all the protocols, safety protocols, and so on and so forth. So we spoke, says Alexandros, to the Union of Insurance Companies. We spoke to lawyers and firms that work together with insurance organizations that work all over the world. So let me just give you my personal view and tell you how I approach the given subject. Some years ago, we had the GDPR situation. In the past, we knew nothing about GDPR, this regulation about protection of personal data, this EU regulation. So in the GDPR, you can never be 100% protected. If there are 5 hackers right now that decide to hack into a hotel site, they will destroy it completely. They will obliterate it. I mean, they can even go into a CIA site. So what you need to prove, however, is that you have faithfully observed the security measures in order for you to be protected. I'm not saying that you will be 100% protected. This is not humanly possible. But I actually draw this analogy to COVID-19. If there will be a case, it may arrive. Statistically speaking, this might happen. And I speak for the hoteliers, but for all professionals in general. So what is important is to prove that you have observed the measures, the laws, that everybody's been informed, that you've trained your personnel, that there are personal safety measures in place, meaning that you actually do what you need to do in order to protect yourself against what may happen in the future. So what is important is for people to be informed, people who actually contact one another. Let us not forget that the hoteliers community is a small community, and people come into contact with one another. And of course, the staff's canteen, sometimes you have people working there who may also be working in the hotel restaurant. So there is a lot of contact, and we need to faithfully observe the measures. And I'd like to also mention that the insurance companies don't have a specific package that is available, maybe because they haven't checked, they don't know the insurance risk yet. So, of course, there are various scenarios, so they have to understand whether there will be a second wave in the autumn of COVID-19. So right now, they can't calculate the insurance risk, so they don't know what to charge if there were such an insurance package. So I think it will be some time before we see some insurance coverage against such phenomena. There's a question from Santorini. It came on Facebook, and I quote, "Hello from Santorini. The most positive prediction is for us to have tourism in August or September." And we know that Santorini is a case where they have tourism many months a year. So even if there are no cases, how will companies and staff survive? That is the million-dollar question. Well, it's important for us to understand 2 things: how big the hotel units are, their architecture, and the distribution channel. Mykonos and Santorini have a huge percentage of tourists compared to the rest of Greece, and these are direct tourists. So what does this mean, direct tourists? Some people may go via Athens and fly to Santorini, some people from Asia, and will reach their destination. Now, if you talk about Kos, Zakynthos, or Corfu, however, where there are much bigger hotel units, the situation is very different. And this is something we need to pay close attention to, how we approach tourism, because not all the places in Greece work in the same way as tourist destinations. And even though from a political point of view, it may sound clever to have one approach, that's wrong. You need to look at the specifics of each area, how big the hotel units are, how spacious they are, whether For example, there are huge hotels that are in cities, and there are others that are sprawling, if you like, little units. They're not in one building, but scattered in small bungalows, so to speak. So you need to look at all the characteristics of these hotels or tourism enterprises. Let me move on to Mrs. Zuni now. Mrs. Zuni, you talked about some surveys that were conducted by your university. Let me repeat where you can find us. SNF Dialogues, there's a problem with our platforms, so we expect your questions via Instagram and Facebook, or send us to snfdialogues@snf.org, which is our email, your questions. So I think that it is very important for us to talk about the destination. In the past, this was important when we decided to go on travel. But the question is, those who travel, what are they looking for now? What do they want? I'm talking about people who tentatively actually try to do some market research in order to see where they'll go when they decide to travel. Because as we said, there are no price wars right now. It's not price sensitive. Of course, the money that one has at his disposal will play a role, but I don't think that this is what actually will be the decisive factor. I think that now they'll go for different criteria. Am I right, Mrs. Zuni? Do you want to talk about the new travel behavior in Greece or abroad? Or do you want me to tell you about what we expect that will happen when the hotels open? Since we've been talking about Greece, but also the rest of the world, maybe we can talk about both levels. Lovely. Mrs. Zuni, the results regarding the international scene and Greece, they're almost identical. So what we see is that 30% of people travel, 15 to 19 from America, and Europeans will travel in August. So 1 in 3 would love to travel from Europe. And of course, here we see that many in Greece want to travel, 6 out of 10, but they will travel within their country. So 6 out of 10 will travel, and half will go to hotels. The rest will go stay at relatives or friends. That's what always happens in Greece. Only 25% of Greek tourists end up in hotels. So there will be some traffic. So what do travelers seek? What criteria make them decide to travel and where they travel? How do they pick their destination? Well, according to the survey, we see that hygiene, public hygiene, observance of protocols, this is the main thing they're looking for. A safe destination, this is something that is of great importance to them. And of course, what's also important is that even during lockdown, people were trying to read about destinations, not destinations that they would necessarily go to, but also because this was good for their psychology. It boosted their morale because they were going through a rough patch. So we believe in marketing that even now that there's a lockdown, we have to work hard on marketing, on tourism marketing, because it's good for me to see what the market wants in order for me to decide to open my hotel. It's not that I'm going to open one fine day without having done any groundwork. Could you give us an example so that we can understand what exactly you are saying? So we see that a lot of people want to go back to nature. So most people want more space. So they may go to areas which are close to nature. But we're not only talking about mountains here, according to the survey, because a lot of people think of going to the beach or the sea when they talk about going back to nature. So Greece is par excellence a destination where people can be close to nature. So we have to see what the target audiences could be, because these travelers might want to go to an island, or they might want to go to a place which is by the sea. So I think that all these hoteliers and tourist enterprises should look at the trends. Now, according to Google Trends, we saw that there are certain markets we'd never thought of. For example, Dubai, or certain places like Jordan, for example. And somebody may try to see who's looking for me. For example, the Poles, people from Poland, the Polish. So we can't only expect people just to come and knock on our door. We have to see what's happening and what interests there are. So it's not whether the markets are looking for us. We also have to see what the markets are doing. For example, we have to see because, for example, Qatar had a lot of COVID-19 cases. A lot of cases tested positive in comparison to the population. And now let's talk about the market side. Is this happening already? Is there room for improvement? Are you already looking at what's happening around and who's looking for you? Well, Mr. Bouchalis, and then Mr. Vasilikos will take the floor. Well, I think it's rather early to conduct a survey and a quantitative and primary research. The reason being that things change very quickly. They are constantly in flux. And you may draw conclusions which may not be the right conclusions. I see some meta research, and I see this from surveys that are being conducted at a global level. And now I see 4 segments or 4 groups. One group is the people who actually want to protect themselves, maybe people who have some underlying disease, some people who are senior citizens, they won't travel. And second group, those who have lost their income. They've lost their income because they were fired. For example, in the previous web seminar, I was talking about people in the tourism industry who are now being made redundant and are trying to find a job. They don't know where they're going to find work. So these are people who've lost their income, who've lost their job, and people who have lost revenue from investments or from mortgage loans. So we're talking about the return on capital in the market. So these people will be affected seriously. Now, there's a third group or third segment. I call them the smart tourists. These are people who are checking to see whether the Greek hotels will open, what's going to happen next month, and then they will check the prices and flights and where they can leave from. And then there's another 4th segment, which I call the kamikaze. And this is of great interest to us. This is of great interest to Greece. This is an important segment. So we have the kamikazes. These are the kamikazes that told Georgia that they will actually go on holiday. Yes, they're the risk takers, says Georgia Zuni. It has been found that 30% are risk takers. This is what the bibliography mentions them as. The kamikaze, says Mr. Bouchalis. And they're dangerous. These are maybe asymptomatic. These are people who might end up in Mykonos. They might have no symptoms or just a few symptoms, but they don't want to admit that they have COVID-19. And this is something else that I'd like to mention. Many people don't understand it. When we're talking about travelers, we're not talking about isolated business travelers who, for example, you going to the US and myself going to Hong Kong and coming back. We're talking about groups of people, 4 or 5 people, for example, a family, or the Italians, a lot of them travel together. They're all friends, for example, in huge groups. And the Brits, but normally the Brits travel with their family, like groups of 3 or 4 people. But I'm talking about the kamikaze now. And we also see certain destinations, and this is of interest to us. And we're talking about the product, the Greek tourist product, and this has been communicated to them as a lovely Greek product. And they feel free, for example, because they were more oppressed in their own countries. I think you know what I'm getting at. And things are actually, well, it's a bit difficult for us to see what's happening there. Things are pretty dangerous when it comes to these people who come to Greece to have a good time and do things they couldn't do in their own country. Well, in general, it's very difficult. We see there are a lot of people who don't believe that there is coronavirus. They believe that it's, for example, a conspiracy theory. And they believe it's not true. And there's also another thing that's very important. Some people say, look, if a customer comes to us and he's had 3 beers, it'll be very difficult for those at the hotel to ask for him to behave in a responsible manner. It's different when there's a business traveler who goes to the city center and he's by himself. That's one thing. And it's different if you have a whole group of people going to resort, staying at this resort for 14 whole days. This is why I tread very carefully. I don't want to generalize and to talk about general strategies. We have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, ad hoc, and we have to have specific approaches for specific cases. And let me say that this is not just a primary research. We want to have a constant update. We want to look at the sources. This is an ongoing thing. We must be smart in our approach, and we need to have constant feedback per 24/7. So all the time we need to adjust to the circumstances. This is difficult, and this is what's going to be happening from now on. There's a lot that we need to discuss, and there are many questions that have been asked. I think we need to actually give them the possibility to express their views. So there's no problem with the platform now. You can send us your questions, and of course you can also send them to the platforms. So hello from Facebook. I'd like to ask what the alternative solution is from now on for conference tourism, as well as companies that come to Greece and combine their conference with a program. So what is the marketing plan that we need to follow? Thank you very much. Just a brief reminder, conference tourism, which had suffered greatly during the crisis and which was about to recover in Athens, suffered greatly. So could you please answer the question that was just posed by somebody on Facebook? I believe that conference tourism will be one of the last forms of tourism that will restart. Till January 2021, all the conferences have been canceled or postponed indefinitely. This was a huge, if you like, impact, a terrible impact, a disaster. And now that we're used to Zoom, for example, or other platforms, somebody's boss may ask him, why do I have to spend thousands upon thousands to take you to that conference so that you can attend the conference? So we will now have new forms of conferences which will be blended, meaning there will be people at the conference and people from home. Then there might be a conference in America, and there will be 100, for example, conferences in Athens. So we'll have new forms of conferences. This is a question that will be answered in the future. And of course, I feel sorry for people who have large conference halls. And we also have excellent facilities. This will come back, though. This will be restored because a physical presence cannot be replaced by a digital, but it will take some time. And there's another factor that we need to take into account. Many organizations will not let their employees travel for professional reasons, for conferences, because they don't want anything bad to happen to their staff, because then they'll be responsible for what happened. I was not allowed to go to a conference, any conferences from the month of March. They told me, you can't go to Asia, you can't go here, you can't go there. They stopped me because Bournemouth University said, look, I cannot put your health at risk. I cannot send you to a conference. Do whatever you like, but you're not going to the conference because you might be at risk. Your health might be at risk. Mr. Vasilikos, we talked about conference tourism. We also have the tourism that we all know here and abroad. We're talking about sun and sea and so on and so forth, because people come to Greece for the sun and sea, for example. But maybe we should first be talking about cultural tourism. And many abroad talk about cultural tourism, but one would have expected more people to be interested in cultural tourism. There's room for improvement there. So let's talk about the dynamics. Let's talk about the perspectives. Let's look about the reassessment of the Greek product, the Greek tourism product. What do we perceive as the product that we offer to tourists? And could you, and I'm referring to all the participants, the speakers, Mr. Bouchalis, Mrs. Zuni, since you've also looked at what's happening in the international community. And another question is, how do foreigners perceive us? What do they think of the Greek product, the Greek tourism product? I think that it's important for us to dwell on this a little bit, if possible. Let's look at the approach. Let's look at the future prospects. What's the outlook? Even under these difficult circumstances, things, of course, may slowly improve. So the government, for some months now, has initiated a dialogue on the strategy to further develop tourism. And we're talking about a 10-year horizon and strategic planning. This is very positive because tourism is something that needs a plan. And I think that all other activities need a plan of sorts. But what I believe that we're experiencing today, and I repeated this in the past, this crisis will be an accelerator. It will act as a catalyst. It will accelerate trends that we had already seen. Mrs. Zuni talked about going back to nature, and we have different perceptions of nature. Different nationalities perceive it differently. And of course, we're also talking about different social groups. It may be depending on the income, on where they're from, and so on and so forth, and how they perceive things and their likes and dislikes. But what we need to bear in mind is something more general. There is nothing that is constant anymore, nothing that is carved in stone. We cannot expect that we can go back and say that we can do things like this and everything will be fine for 10 years. Globalization has turned things on its head. Our parents know, for example, and our ancestors say, for example, our parents and grandparents, that this is not what it was like back in our days. And every generation says the same for the next generation. But now it's not just the change, it's how fast things change. And without having to change generations, things can happen inside the same generation. And these are things that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. It would have taken 50 years in the past. Now this change takes place in 5 years. So what I'm trying to say is things will continue to rapidly change. Things will change much faster, and habits will change much faster. So what's important in my case, and I'd like to say that I've seen very nice questions. One question, the million-dollar question, and of course, nobody wants to make forecasts. But somebody asked, what about 2021? What will that be like, that year, from a tourist point of view? Well, it's very difficult to make forecasts. This is my general conclusion. And what will actually define success is the possibility to adjust. You have to be agile. You have to be versatile. And I'm not talking about us being able to adjust our adaptability as a country. But the good thing about Greece is that we are an archipelago of islands. We have many islands and many different destinations. And we can cater different needs and different tastes. So that is where our success would lie. This is what we need to focus on and invest in. We mustn't be scared to take strategic decisions to address niche markets and say, for example, that this island, this destination will be addressed to these needs, and I will try to cater for a niche market. So I'd like to say that Greece has a lot to offer. Greece has culture, Greece has sea, Greece has cultural heritage. It's very difficult to find destinations that have so much to offer like Greece. But you have to use the existing infrastructure, you have to create the necessary infrastructure in order for you to say that I will be able to adjust, but I need to actually say something and be decisive in the way that I apply it. I think that you described everything very eloquently. You said that you need to have character and you need to actually have this actual character. And I think we're quite lucky. We don't really have so much to do because we have a lot to offer. I talked about Dubai and I use it to compare it to Greece. In Dubai, they had nothing. It was all sand and sea. And it's not sea you swim in that easily, but they made it beautiful. They said, we don't have islands, we'll build islands. And they had specific policies in place. And they tried to attract tourists. And they started from scratch. Whereas we are lucky. We are lucky because even in antiquity, Greece was a prime destination. So we need to move ahead. We don't need to do much, but we need to do whatever we need to do. Now, this is another message that you conveyed. I'm not going to dwell on this matter, but a lot of people were worried about what happened in the last 3 days, and I'm talking about what happened in tourism, and specifically on the island of Mykonos. So we see a lot of things that are changing, but are also unprecedented. There's an example, the latest incident in this shop in this place in Mykonos, which was heavily criticized. And it also says that where I work in Skorpios on the island of Mykonos, how exactly can we police people who've actually traveled from so far to come to us? What is the social distancing, the physical distancing that we should observe? What protocols do we need to observe? How realistic is the scenario? And so on and so forth. I think that the answer should be granted through a message which is like the message for cigarettes or alcohol, meaning enjoy, but do so responsibly. So we are in a unique situation. We have to have different protocols. So judging by what happened in Mykonos, I assume that they did not stick to the protocol. So nobody had calculated the carrying capacity of this particular shop. For example, if this was a place which could have 500 people, they should not allow 500 people inside. They should allow 80. So we can't actually do what we did in the previous year. So the carrying capacity for this shop should have been actually calculated. They should have said, we can open, but we can only have 80 people at a time. Otherwise, we cannot do it. So we see that then the government imposed sanctions, and it imposes sanctions on shop owners who do not follow protocol. And they jeopardize not just their own health, but also the health of other people. And this is bad for the entire destination, for the entire island. If I were to conduct a survey in a tourist area and I asked the locals whether you want tourism this year and whether you want to have tourists, I don't know what the results would be. I don't know what the answers would be. I think that those who are directly linked to tourism would say, yes, we want tourists because we need to survive, because they said we'll either die of starvation, of hunger, or from the coronavirus, the COVID-19. So maybe local communities are not prepared to deal with the situation if the protocols are not observed. And of course, you can't have a policeman next to every bar. We have to act responsibly, individually, as consumers. We mustn't frequent such bars or go to indoor parties. And I'm talking about what happened these last few days. And of course, we shouldn't condone such behavior because we know that the results will be disastrous. Let me move on now with the other questions. Could you tell us whether there has been any forecast for archaeological tourism? I'm talking about guides, tourist guides. We know that everything has been postponed till end of August. We know that even if we're talking about small groups that need a tourist guide, families or groups of 5, 6 people, and not just cruise ships or large groups.
Well, wait and see. Or brace, 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 as we say. Chances are that there will be much fewer groups from cruises or otherwise this year. It's for sure. We'll not have cruises in Athens, right? So those who live off cruises will not have the same income. Of course, they can have an Instagram showcasing their services, and they could probably win individuals of very, very small groups. Listen, we're not going back. We're moving forward to a new reality that will be totally different compared to the previous one. So it's a new paradigm. Even for those who'd like to get a guided tour, because the question was referring to guided tours to antiquities, etc., irrespective of cruises. For smaller groups, there's a problem also here. Can you confirm that? Vasilikos. Well, let me put it in financial terms. The hotel revenue has a multiplier in the economy, 2 to 2.5. It could be even higher according to some research. The tourist guide is part of this multiplier. The taverna, the garment industry, even the souvlaki shop, all these are parts of the multiplier. It is obvious that all these people will suffer, even the plumber who will renovate during the winter. And this applies to all countries, but even more so for our country. Many professions depend heavily on tourism, so it's clear there will be a problem for all these categories. But some people think there's no adequate information about guided tours in antiquities, irrespective of who will come. I'm sorry, Vasilikos, there are protocols, you know, and more protocols are produced and revised and so on. These protocols are not static. They may develop in one or the other direction, depending on the situation. So, as I said in my introduction, the timeline is not ideal, but we have to survive. This is a situation without precedent. And of course, you can criticize each and every decision why this protocol was not produced 1 week later or earlier or whatever. But mind you, these decisions are not easy. Miss Zuni, I should probably give the floor to Miss Zuni. But please conclude first. One last thing. And since I see another question concerning hotel staff, I would like to say a few words on this. There are many startups, you know, that we support. I mean, our chamber supports, who adapted very quickly, providing virtual services. You see, there are solutions. Mr. Bouchelis said it, we must engage with the new era. And in this respect, unfortunately, we're not among the pioneers. And it's a shame because we have the right people, we have the right staff. And to answer the question concerning hotel staff, yes, of course, it is a very topical question, but let's first give the floor to Ms. Zuni and then take the next question on board. Yes, we need to know what will happen about hotel staff and those who would be recruited by hotels during summer. But Ms. Zuni, your research is very interesting. You study tourists and business owners and the way they meet, so to speak. These are two different communities, of course, but what is your take on this? This is the question you raised. Can we innovate? Can we intensify research? Can we study the way people search a destination? How this affects Greek tourism? What are the tools available to Greek tourism? What can we do today? Can we experiment? Ms. Zuni. Look, we can all do things. The state, destinations, businesses, citizens, we all have a shared responsibility. We cannot just sit back and wait from others. We have a collective responsibility. We all have to deal with the problem and assume. We all need targeted help. This is the other thing for sure. The tourist season will be difficult until September. So we need assistance from collective bodies in a top-down form. And then for the day after, I fully agree that we should revise our business models on an individual, group or collective level. So if you ask me, I think we can remain optimistic, because even if we work with domestic tourism, if we survive this summer, we'll have incoming tourism later. So let's work with our protocols. Let's keep our domestic tourists at bay. Let's work with lower load factors. We cannot change that, but let's start working for the day after. Today, there are many things we can do. Another thing we can do is to put to good use all stages, all phases of the trip. And this starts from home. The tourist does so many things before even visiting their destination. We haven't done our homework in this respect. We just sat back and waited for the tourists to arrive. So we should work upstream. Harvard say that we'll have social distancing for many months to come. And we cannot exclude other epidemics after the pandemic. This means we have to work with tourists while they are still at home. How can we engage them? We could form rooms the way tourists would like it, or we can showcase vegetable gardens on the island of Astipale and what have you. Mr. Vasilikos put this very eloquently, and you are adding to this approach very interesting dimensions. You're talking about the more holistic experience, in other words, a new way of engaging with a tourist that we don't want to be a simple consumer. It's not just about an all-inclusive hotel or any other accommodation. It's not about the typical traditional segregation of tourist habits. This sounds like an old-fashioned model. Okay, don't engage too much with tourists. Let's keep our distances, 1.5 meters at least. Well, when I said engage, I didn't mean embrace. Zuni, we have to offer value. We must show our tourists that we have studied their needs, that we have engaged, and that we have devoted time to the needs of their accommodation. Pustuku, another question is this. Could this be an opportunity for agencies to reconsider their products and services? Could we promote excursions to regions, stressing responsible tourism, educational tourism, link with the natural environment? Or could that lead to stretching the tourist period and make a more healthy tourism? Vasilikos, absolutely. Very good points. But this should not be limited to this year, which is a lost year. We should do this every day, every week, every month. Capsule does exactly this. We have small businesses who send vegetables to visitors who live abroad. There's ample data around. We can relatively easily study what people want. So let us refocus our products and services. Well, another question concerning vouchers. Is there a guarantor? There are countries where the state is the guarantor, but only in the case of certain businesses only. Can a business use the voucher on behalf of another business? If a company goes bankrupt, or if a hotel changes management, I think this is not the end of the question. Mr. Vasilikos, I think you're best placed to provide an answer here. Vasilikos. Traditionally, the problem is the opposite. Hotel owners are not paid by agencies, not vice versa. In a hotel, even if the management or the ownership changes, the new owner assumes assets and liabilities, and of course, they will honor the voucher. So it's not a relevant question. It is definitely not a concern. Voucher or the use of vouchers is not a problem, even in cases where a hotel would go bankrupt. Now, of course, this summer is different, that we know. I don't know about guarantees, if the state is guarantor in terms or for the purpose of vouchers. But vouchers are a viable solution. It is a sign of our times. We need to avoid extreme situations. We are all on the same boat. We don't distinguish between bad and good guys. No, we are all on the same boat. And this boat cannot afford to sink. The plane cannot afford to crash. And then, if we survive, we will strike the right balance. We cannot ask a hotel owner to pay back all advance payments. At the same time, the hotel cannot say, well, tough luck, I'll keep the money and I will close down. You should give the possibility to your guests to come later or during the next 12 months. This is balance, and this is the solution offered by several countries. What about telemedicine? Could this enhance the feeling of safety for visitors? And who will pay? The tourists? Can hotels shoulder this cost? Mr. Vasilikos, I'm afraid you are the competent authority here. It's not clear whether the question concerns a horizontal measure or on a case-by-case basis. If we're talking about a horizontal measure, of course, the hotel owners cannot pay for everyone, every guest, especially when the test is not available in large numbers, and even more, especially when the test costs 200 euros. You know the average cost of a hotel night in Greece. Now, telemedicine is fine, but we cannot cover everything. We cannot cover even testing. I'm not a specialist here, but no, this is not a perfect solution. What we need to do is, of course, to strengthen our national health system. And please, let's forget about this distinction incoming tourists from locals. The mayor of Firenze was telling me that if my people, the people of Florence, are happy, then the same applies to visitors and vice versa. This concerning the health system. I mean that if the health system is good for the locals, then it's good for the incoming tourists. This should be our objective. Bouchalis. The financial part is important. You may pay 30 euros for a hotel room in one case, a 3-star hotel. Now, if a health problem arises, the cost involved is huge and does not compare with the 30 euros. There was a question earlier concerning insurance. It was replied by Alexandros. Insurance companies are meant to face uncertainty, but the virus is a certainty these days. It's not uncertainty. So the premium would be huge if insurance companies accepted to insure for the virus. Actually, insurance companies do not insure for the virus. So one reason tour operators have huge problems this year is that they cannot get insurance, and they cannot operate without insurance. Next question. What is the best source of information for the tourist industry in order to better understand trends and revise their strategy? Well, this is about general guidelines. Well, probably the academic community should reply. Well, the universities do know, and I'm happy many people turn to the universities. I've been doing this job for the last 30 years, and very rarely the big boys of the tourism industry have turned to the universities. However, now, because of the crisis, they turn to the academia to learn how they can deal about the crisis. Well, the Greek ministries have not talked to me. I work with ministers all over the world, with the World Tourism Organization. This morning's webinar involved ministers from all over the world. Well, these people are interested in getting to know more, and we travel all over the world. Now, going back to Greece, we're on autopilot, I'm afraid. We had better years, worse years. I remember a simple visit to Berlin or London sufficed to say it's a good year or a less good year. And then we sat back and enjoyed life. Well, Alexandros is very experienced, that's why he's smiling, but this cannot continue. We are already in the next phase concerning professionalism. We are ushering in a new level of professionalism with more strategic planning, with more research, with more technology, away from petty interests. These petty interests have destroyed Greece. So we need a holistic and more sustainable approach. We need more resilience. Take roads Corfu and Kos. They depend more than 80% on tourism. Crete is 50%, and some other islands are at 25%. These are very important numbers to know. Well, high dependence is not good, but tourism is the only industry where they have a strategic comparative advantage. So we have been too long on autopilot, I'm afraid, and this cannot carry on, not just in Greece, all over the world. We need strategy, a plan, we need to better understand our clients, we need to understand better the distribution channels, we need to implement differentiation, etc., etc. We need a knowledge-based tourism. And a message from Crete. I want your comment on this. Crete as a tourist destination and as an investment-friendly destination. Well, I will not be objective, although I come from Limnos. I visit Crete every year to produce my own eau de vie. However, I can say a few words on Crete. And I will repeat what I said earlier. All destinations need an identity, and Crete has a huge array of identities to pick from. So Crete can invest and can succeed. But everything depends on the value added through synergies. This is tourism. Which products, which services? And our hotel chamber works with the agri-food industry. You know about the Greek breakfast. We work with the startups, with the world of technology, on sustainable development. These are the beacons of our action for the future. Mizuni gave a very good example. We want tourists who come and have a tomato salad in our hotel. They should be able to order the same tomato and receive it at home. So our welfare, our success is in our hands. Another very good question is the following. It also concerns the day after. We need a public-private partnership. This is a huge challenge for our country. There's no previous experience in this respect. Any proposals or comments on this?
I think that this is a dead end. It's the only way, it's the only way forward. Something that is self-evident that we should take for granted, we consider to be very different, but it's a one-way street. There's nowhere else to go. This is the only way we can improve the situation. Many might wonder when looking at the question, how is this going to happen? How is this possible? I think that when Greeks work together, they do so because of necessity. So I think we need to look at it as an opportunity, not as a necessity. So we shouldn't wait till we have our back to the wall. We have to strive for collaboration collaboration because we have to look at tourism as a tourist. For a tourist, the journey starts and the trip starts from the moment he leaves his home and finishes at his destination. If a taxi driver overcharges a Dutch tourist who's going to go and stay at Grand Bretagne, you can understand that this will put a damper on the overall experience they have as tourists. So you have to see things through the eyes of the tourist. We should be interested in what the tourist has to say, because this is what the tourist wants. This is the overall tourist experience. And during the crisis, you must follow the protocols, and you must also be interested in what your next door neighbor has done and whether he or she has followed the protocol. So we all have to assume our individual responsibility. That's how the change can be effected. That's the only way forward. I also talked about adoption in large hotels in Corfu and Rhodes, where the hotel managers have been professional for many years. And I went to Corfu recently. Well, they said that big hotels should adopt smaller hotels and small restaurants so that they can train them on the protocols, and then they can actually take them by the hand, show them the platform of the Hellenic Chamber of Hotels. So collaboration is the only way forward. Collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. It's the only way forward. I speak on behalf of the University of Piraeus. Well, Mr. Bouchalis, you can speak first, and then I will take the floor. What's important is for people to understand how they can work together, how they can create clusters so that they can work like networks and have specific things. For example, a cluster for wine tourism, a cluster that will be addressed more to children that come as tourists with their families, or something that might have to do with photography or food, for example, gastronomy. So these can be the so-called clusters. And somebody talked about alternative tourism in a question. So we need to have clusters of people working together, and we need to have the public and private sector working hand in hand, because we're one destination. We should act as one. Now, universities, for example, we saw that the scientists were in the front line in the case of COVID, the COVID-19 outbreak. And in the University of Piraeus, we've had 3 webinars. Over 5,000 professionals attended. This was for the Chamber of the Cyclades Islands. So it's not just to conduct research. We also have to train, and we need to work together. I see many questions coming our way. We're being bombarded with questions, and we have to manage these questions. Here is one question. Dear colleague, I don't know who this is addressed to. I think, Mr. Vasilikos, it's addressed to you. So in the beginning of the discussion, you said that the government has taken all the measures in order for us to operate correctly. Could you explain these measures to us? Do you know that up until this moment, seasonal hotels have not received not a single euro, so that they don't have the capital to open up and to operate? So, Mr. Vasilikos, you can answer the question. We know time is running. So what do you think we should do? Do you know that in the protocols, a woman cleaner who works in the laundry room where there's a temperature of 50 degrees Celsius has to wear PPEs and a nylon, for example, overcoat? Are these the right measures in order for us to operate correctly? Let me not be misunderstood. I mentioned some measures, and these measures are related to the protocols. Now, whether there was some financial, if you like, support or assistance, our positions, the positions of the Hellenic Chamber of Hotels are known. We've expressed them from the start, and we said that the financial assistance provided up until now was not enough. It was not sufficient. And we know that no government in the world could actually take all the measures from day one. The government will wait for the situation to unfold. We, of course, had seen the message on the wall from very early on. We saw the problems with the airlines. And I understand, however, that the government has to work, but it couldn't do everything at once. And of course, these measures are not sufficient. important because we see that the tourists are not here. And of course, this is not like other activities where we have local consumers. 90% of the case. In tourism, 90% of the cases are tourists from abroad, and these tourists will not come. At least 90% of them will not come. And I would like you to answer both questions. I left this deliberately for the end because no matter what we say, we mustn't say things superficially. And of course, we need to see what's coming, and we need to understand what it means in the case of unemployment, the impact of the pandemic on society and on the economy and on tourism in particular. And let me put this question, and Mr. Vasilikos, you can answer this, but this question is also addressed to Mr. Bouchalis and Mrs. Zuni. So the question is as follows: how should we discuss this? I'm talking about a national plan that needs to be created. So how can we take into account all these thousands of people who will not work this year in the tourism industry? So we're not talking about a stipend. We're not talking about financial assistance. We're talking about whether they should be at the table when all these plans are being made and when the strategy is being carved out. Well, I think it's very important. We know that a lot of people stopped working in September, and they will end up working next May. These people are the people who work in the tourism sector, so they need support, financial support. This is very important. And I'd like to combine the two questions. One question was linked to the hotels, one was linked to the staff. I think that these two questions, or these two categories rather, are linked. They're interwoven. So I think that both the hotels and the staff working in the tourism sector need financial support, because if the hotel doesn't open, it won't be able to take on staff. So the staff needs support too, not just the hotels. And I said that from day one, and this is very, very important, because we always tend to criticize Europe. Europe, the EU, decided from a very early stage to take action. And if 3-4 months ago we had said that the EU would have said that there will be no surpluses this year, everybody would have laughed and scoffed. So we saw that measures are taken. And here we're talking about financial assistance and measures that amount to trillions. So we're talking about transportation, we're talking about tourism, and the people working in these two sectors. So we see that a lot of financial support should be granted in these two sectors so that the tourist industry can survive and the staff can survive. And we're talking about not just now, but in the long term as well, because we know that there were hotels that were working year-round, 12 months a year, and they don't even know when they're going to open again. And maybe the hard times are ahead of us, ahead of them. And I'm not talking about what's going to happen in the summer, but what's going to happen after the summer. So all this needs to be taken into account. And of course, as I said, we need to support the employees and not just the enterprises, the tourism enterprises. One last comment from Mr. Bouchalis and Mrs. Zumini. I started talking about the employees. They should have braced for what was happening, because then they could have taken measures. And of course, no airplanes want to fall from the sky. But if we know that the airplane, for example, is going to fall, we have to cushion the effect. We have to do something to reduce the impact. Of course, there are certain areas, agricultural areas, rural areas, where there may be other activities, and there might be an alternative source of income. People may find work elsewhere. And of course, in the meantime, they can improve their skills, so that when the tourism industry is booming again, they might be able to position themselves better because of their upskilling. So we stand by the side of people who are going to work in this season, the tourist season. But if there isn't enough work, they have to find alternative sources of income, a different job, and try to take advantage of this time period and improve their skills, learn new languages, and so on and so forth. I fully agree with what was mentioned. Of course, there must be measures. As I said, we must have support for the present, financial support for the present, but in the long term, the employees must understand how they need to equip themselves in order to have more skills in the future. And of course, they need to see what suits them best and where they would like to work and so on and so forth. So it might be an opportunity for a new start. And I'm not only talking about hotels or tourism enterprises. Maybe some people didn't like working in the tourism sector. And now, of course, they may be able to, with some financial support, to be able to weather the storm, to be able to make ends meet. And this is why I said we need financial support, and there needs to be other type of support as well. But this might be the opportunity for a new start, a new beginning in this rapidly changing environment. I would like to thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. This was a first round of discussions. People and dialogues know full well that we also had a physical presence now, and we were also available online. Now we have our webcast, so we're only online. Of course, we have now more participation from many different parts of Greece and from the world, because we have changed and we have come closer together, even though physically we're far apart. The same happened with our conference. You mentioned this, Mr. Bouchalis. The annual conference of SNF is an international conference. There are a lot of people who come from abroad, not just to attend it, but we also have many speakers from abroad and many artists, because we have the Summer Nostos Festival. And it is in the Summer Nostos Festival that we hold the SNF conference. This year we'll go online. Speakers, artists, runners, because we also have a run. So everything will be done digitally. You'll see everything online. So we will travel, but we won't travel in the usual way. We'll travel in a different way. So we have to take advantage of what we have at our disposal. Not all people have the same possibilities. So let me remind you, since I mentioned before closing that our conference this year, it will be held on the 22nd and 23rd of June, whereas on the 24th of June, which is a Wednesday, 2 weeks from now, we'll have our next dialogues, our next webcast. We'll be holding a discussion together with SNF Agora from Johns Hopkins University. There we'll be engaged in a discussion. This will be about technology and democracy, and we see that they interact. And let us not forget that during the COVID-19 period, we see what the limits are, the limits that we need to take into account, but also the prospects. I'm talking about AI and technology, for example, and humanity and AI is the theme of our conference. And as you said, Mr. Bouchalis, the human factor will come back, but we have to make sure it comes back. We have to try and cultivate this further. We've seen different things happening, different communities defining their limits and dividing lines. Instead of coming closer together because of the pandemic, they seem to be further apart. So we'll be talking about democracy and how policies are influenced and how they are aided and assisted by technology and AI. But we also must try not to just see who helps who and who manages who. But we can also run online. So Mr. Zuni, Mr. Vasilikos, Mr. Bouchalis, you can run 5 kilometers. You can also walk 5 kilometers. You can do this. So you have to download an application and then you can run or you can walk. Since we can walk, it's okay. I can take part in it. Everybody can participate. It's open to all. So we can run 5 kilometers or walk 5 kilometers. So this is the run. And because on the 23rd of June, we used to do the run. Physically, we went from the Kalimarmaro, we run at night, and we ended up at SNF, at the SNF Cultural Center. Well, this year, we can't do it physically, but we can do it from wherever we are. So you can just download this application and it's Sport Hive Live. So you can download it on your application. And from the 15th to the 21st of June, you can walk or run. But you have to record it somehow and then upload it on the application and send us a selfie because we'll be here on the 23rd. We'll have a virtual run, the SNF virtual run. And of course, I'd like to say that there's free access. Anybody can participate, and this is based on a grant by Stavros Niarchos and Anagennisi and Prodos. Is Regeneration and Progress is the one that runs it, and the amount that will be collected because one can donate. This will be tripled by Stavros Niarchos, and it will be donated to 81 hospitals of Greece. And we said that it's important for us to protect and safeguard public health. And as Mr. Bouchalis said, and I'll repeat it once again, this is also, first and foremost, our individual responsibility. We shouldn't expect everybody else to do everything. Let's watch a short video about this application that we all should download. We have to record the 5 kilometers, whether we walk or run. So send us this recording, send us evidence so that we can see you running or walking, and send us a selfie. So let's watch the video. Mr. Zuni, Mr. Bouchalis, Mr. Vasilikos, thank you again, once again, for the discussion. Let us stay safe. Let us hope that everything runs as smoothly as possible. And let us have a second round of discussion from what's going to happen from then on. Now, when this will take place, well, we don't know what's going to happen afterwards, but we will keep in touch. We will stay in touch and keep in contact. We're all monitoring what's happening in this new landscape, this new environment. So I'm sure that we will surely meet again. Thank you. God bless. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Next time we meet again, 24th of June at 6:30. And this will be held back to back with the SNF run on the 23rd, which is a virtual run. And we also have the annual conference, the SNF annual conference on the 23rd of June.